But yes, welcome everyone, and welcome to Postcards from my 72-year vacation, a conversation with Mitch Markovitz, hosted by the Center for Road Photography and Art. My name is Haley Page, and I'm the Exhibitions and Events Coordinator for the Center. For those of you new to our programming, welcome. The Center for Road Photography Art is an arts nonprofit, membership-based organization that works towards a mission to preserve and present significant images of railroading. You can see that the work that we do in our Railroad Heritage Visual Archive, which has a collection of just over 500,000 images, if I'm correct. We also do publications. We've actually just released a new one just a few months ago called The Railroad and the Art of Place, an Anthology, which you can see more about on our website. Traveling exhibitions, conferences, online and in-person events. And I will just drop our URL in the chat. Our website is railphoto-art.org. Excuse me. So to start things off, I'm just going to run through some housekeeping information on Zoom webinars controls and give an overview of how we're going to be running tonight's Q&A, which is going to be a little different than usual. As I mentioned, we use Zoom webinar for our presentations, which means that audience members do not have access to their personal audio or camera during the event, but you can change how you'd like to view the presentation. In the top right corner of your Zoom screen, I believe your options are between speaker, where you focus on one person speaking at one time, or a gallery where it puts all of the panelists in kind of a Hollywood Squares kind of format. So you can play around with those and see which one you prefer. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a number of different icons. Please use the chat for any comments you have during the presentation. By selecting any panelists and or audience, you will ensure that everyone can see your comment. Please use the Q&A icon to submit any questions you have for Mitch. Following today's presentation, we are going to host a Q&A session. So for tonight's presentation, we will be selectively unmuting attendees so they can ask their question themselves. The only way to have your question selected is to write it in the Q&A tab. Scott and I will review the questions and then call people up to the floor one at a time. Now again, you have to put your question in the Q&A, not the chat, for us to select you. If your question is selected, we'll call your name, so please be ready to ask your question when called on. You will be unmuted for the question and if a brief follow-up if you want, and then muted again following your question. So this is the first time we're going to be trying this format, so we do ask for everyone's patience as we try to iron out the logistics. And hopefully, if it works out well, we can keep doing this for future programs.
And Haley, I just add to that too, that if for anyone who doesn't have a microphone or doesn't want to speak, we can always ask your question for you. But we'd sure like to get some audience participation in the Q&A tonight if we can.
Sure, absolutely. And if you don't have access to a microphone, just put that in your question so we know that ahead of time. We are recording tonight's program and everything will be made available on our YouTube page probably early next week. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/railphotoart. I will also drop that into the chat for everyone. We have a lot of our presentations up there. You can check them out. Let me just turn it over to Scott, who's going to introduce Mitch.
All right. Well, thanks, Haley. And thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm really looking forward to our program with railroad artist Mitch Markovitz as he discusses his lifelong love of railroad art from his earliest memories of visiting the Illinois Central's Grand Crossing station to running trains by that same station some 40 years later as an engineer. Now a revered artist, the themes of Mitch's work tend to focus on the world of railroading, not just trains, but life in railroad situations. Mitch was born on the south side of Chicago, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, and has enjoyed a lifelong interest in the arts as well as railroading. He attended the American Academy of Art and the Chicago Academy of Fine Art before hiring out with the Chicago and Northwestern in 1969, first as a brakeman and later as a suburban ticket collector and passenger service trainman. Mitch's robust role in the rail industry has included a wide variety of other positions, including fireman, hostler, engineer, Amtrak ticket clerk, conductor, service coordinator, and chef. From 1984 until 1999, he served the Chicago, South Shore, and South Bend Railroad in the combined roles of art and creative director, assistant passenger traffic manager, trainman, and engineer. Today, he channels his vast experience of railroading into oil paintings as a commissioned artist. He has also authored the publication How to Draw and Paint Trains Like a Pro, and he co-authored Moonlight and Duneland, the illustrated story of the Chicago, South Shore, and South Bend Railroad. And now I'm just going to do a quick screen share because I do have a couple of visuals I want to share with you before we get started. So here's Mitch about 8-9 years ago. This is the second time we've had the privilege of having Mitch on our stage. The first was, yeah, and no judgment there.
Yeah.
We've all been enjoying some pandemic eating, I think. So this was back at Conversations 2013, our annual conference in Lake Forest, Illinois, where Mitch wowed us with his art and kept us well entertained with his witty commentary, as he's already started off to tonight for those of you who joined us early. Now, for that presentation, he even listed the help of his son, Matt, to help him out with some technical support in that one. And here's a picture of Mitch and Matt on stage. Both that and the last photograph were by our friend Hank Koshalik, who does the photography for us at the conference. Now, you should also know, though, that Mitch is not always very careful about the company he keeps. That company includes one of our board members at the center, Norm Carlson, who also sent me a couple of pictures of Mitch in his element. Both of these come from April of 1985, just a few months after the Venango River Corporation had purchased Mitch's employer, the Chicago, South Shore, and South Bend Railroad. So here we see Mitch in a three-piece suit, trying to outclass a pair of recently painted South Shore GP38-2s near 124th Street in Chicago. The locomotives are, what's that?
It's my Raymond Loewy suit.
Yes, that's perfect. And I should mention that these locomotives are wearing the brand new orange and maroon color scheme that Mitch designed. And the paint here is so fresh that the varnish coat isn't quite dry yet. We were talking about that challenge in oil paints earlier.
Yeah.
These engines are pulling a special passenger train for customers, friends, and civic and political leaders. As I hear from Norm, though, this trip did not end particularly well, as the classification lights burnt out on the lead locomotive during the return trip, forcing all of the guests onto the last regular passenger train of the evening so they could get back to Randolph Street. We can't blame you for that, though, Mitch.
No.
Now, the following weekend, Venango ran a fan trip to show off their new railroad to more of the public, sponsored by the Chicago Electric Railroad Association. And here we see several executives posing with Mitch, who's there wearing looks like a pretty sharp chromer cap and red flannel shirt in the middle of this picture.
Yeah.
And as Norm oh, there we go. Perfect. Yes, it's there. And as Norm explained this to me, you were checking the time on your railroad pocket watch to remind the photographer, who was Norm, not to hold up this train.
Yep.
And
well, it's like our wedding pictures. You know, we had a lot of trainmen at our wedding. We have one picture, everyone that worked on the railroad, everybody's looking at their watch.
You got to run the trains on time.
Yes.
Including our train tonight. So I don't want to hold up the show any longer. And so without further ado, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Mitch Markovitz for tonight's presentation. And over to you, Mitch, and Haley will get your presentation up, and then you can take, and there it is, and take us away. We'll be here if you need us.
Okay. I always talk about my career in terms of so many years as a vacation, because I've been very lucky in that I've been able to do exactly what I set out to do in my life since childhood. And I mean to the letter. Okay. We were talking about Grand Crossing and watching trains on the Illinois Central. This scene is more representative of 87th Street Woodruff around 1960, which was the other place where we picked my father up from the train when we moved further south. But I learned how to draw in perspective very early on. I was completely absorbed by the multi-track main line of the IC and South Shore trains passing Illinois Central multiple unit electric trains. And in this one, at age 9, I have myself in the engineer's window of the Illinois Central train wearing overalls and a cap and a tie. And that's how I looked when I was an engineer on the South Shore line, going by this very location. This is magic marker and watercolor. Okay. Ooh, around the same time, I developed an appreciation and affinity for type and lettering. And Illinois Central monthly and 10 ride and 25 ride and multiple ride tickets, and how they were all stacked up in different shelves and alcoves in a ticket case, and how they looked and how they felt, because back then they were letterpress printed, so the type pushed down onto the cardstock they were printed on had a texture. Well, one thing I started to do was make hand lettered tickets. I never used them or anything, but I liked making them. They were a challenge, but this is how I learned how to do layout and hand lettering. And this one particular coupon, this is like, back then they were moving away, railroads were moving away from long strips of tickets to coupon books. And this is like a coupon book. Okay. Later on, when I was on my own as a commercial illustrator, I did these 2 tickets, one for the Kalamazoo Lakeshore in Chicago, and the other one was for us for a special promotion we did with the bus line in South Bend for Notre Dame home games. So I made what amounted to one of the last interline ticket forms in the country. And the one on the left for the Kalamazoo Lakeshore, I used all the typefaces that a regular ticket printer would have used. We laid it out just like it would come off a coupon press. And I went to Globe Ticket Company because they still had the wavy line safety paper that was like association ticket paper that everybody used in the Railroad Interline Ticket Association. And it was made, the paper itself was made by, it's a Simpson security paper now, but back then it was the CF Lamont Safety Paper Company, and it's watermarked. That's a whole discussion on its own. So I'm not going to get into that, but it came out to my eye very convincing. Okay. When I really started to do images, finished art and scenarios and images, I hadn't learned enough about working with color. I tended to work I worked exclusively with pencil or with litho crayon on Quoquil pebbles finished stock, and did everything in tone value. I was able to get an image that I liked, but I still wanted to work in color. And it took an instructor that worked for my father. We had a small art school in the 80s in the Tree Studio building behind Medina Temple. And he taught me a couple of things. And one thing he said to me that really knocked me off center, that propelled me into working with color, was don't add white or black, just change color. Okay. This is my cabaret. A couple of things. In the early 70s, I bought an anthology of work and special lithographed color images of a book by Norman Rockwell, on Norman Rockwell's work. I admired him greatly. I admired his professionalism. This is an exact duplicate of his cabaret, which I thought was ingenious. I mean, he made his himself, I made mine myself. And basically it's an old music stand with a cast iron base with a big piece of white architectural vitrolite glass glued on the top. And a client of mine made the wooden box that is fastened behind it to hold tubes of paint. And it's just very practical. And I like the feeling of mixing the paint on a smooth surface. But once I learned how to articulate color, I had no problems with it. Okay. This is one of the earliest color works I did, which I didn't intend to become a poster, but it ended up becoming a poster that I worked with Kevin McKinney and Mike Schaefer and Passenger Train Journal, and it became a new Old South Shore poster. This is from a William Middleton photograph, but I never saw a color picture of a South Shore Line train when we had the dining cars and the parlor cars and our long limiteds. So I did this, and I imagined it was a Sunday morning trip in on a job I would have liked to have been a conductor on. So we train 10, the Fort Dearborn Limited, 2 coaches, a diner and a parlor. But I did this in pastel on 3M electric cut emery cloth, which has a remarkably good tooth for holding pastel pigment. And once 3M found out it was an artist material, they doubled the price. So I did this work. I was very pleased with it. We ended up making it a poster. The original is in the offices of the South Shore Freight in Michigan City at Carroll Avenue. Okay. This is something that I've taught in color workshops about working with color. There's 3 major contrasts that you have to use. The first one, just like with black and white and pencil and charcoal work, is light against dark. Then going into color, warm colors against cool colors. A warm color is like yellow or cadmium red, a bright red, and a cool color is like ultramarine blue or ultramarine violet. It's the same as if you put a hot chili pepper in your mouth and 2 grapes. That's the contrast. And if you can feel that, it's working for you. And then you do color against its color opposite. So if I had an area that was basically yellow, I would make a shadow in violet because that's the color opposite of yellow. And it sets off a visual vibration. It goes back to prehistoric times when we relied on our vision for hunting and gathering. It's the same with doing things in 3-dimensional with edges. Okay. When I went to work for the South Shore Line, the first thing I had to do to get hired was kind of like a stunt. And the stunt was upper left-hand corner, the timetable of July of 1984. Not since 1972 had the South Shore Line issued a full timetable. So I did all this artwork. I found an old typesetter west of the Loop in Chicago. I got all this old type and laid everything out. But then I had the problem of the times and the columns for arrival and departure. I took a South Shore Line timetable. There's like a special font for AM and PM times that all the timetable printers use that you can't get anymore. I had photostats made, an early version of copying. And I cut up all the little individual numbers and times and I pasted them on illustration board. And that's how I made the timetable, but it worked. And car 16 that I've got on the illustration, that was the last car I operated when I was an engineman. And that, of course, is me in the cab because my vanity knows no bounds. And then the next one, just a reissue of a timetable. I did new artwork for it. Norm Carlson actually asked me years ago how I chose the colors for this. It's kind of like the Electroliner from the North Shore, but that's not what that is. My wife had some medication that came in a very attractive box. That was the colors. I liked it. I used it. It's the way it is. It's called Hitchhike. Next is the Horizon brochure that I did. And I wanted to do the cover in color as an illustration. It's identical, only in color, to the timetable. And it had a poster quality to it, which is pretty much what I was going for. And then there's this map over on the right that's on the back of another timetable. I just like the pictorial visuals. At the bottom is the pictorial back of the Horizon brochure. In the general office building, there was a huge, like 6 foot long by 5 feet tall, I really don't know the dimensions, painting that was done by Ivan Beard, one of the poster artists, that was a panorama of the entire South Shoreline from Chicago to South Bend. And I'd always been impressed by it. So I wanted to recreate it here, which is what I did. I've done a couple of these for different clients. For me, it's entertaining. It's like taking a trip back and forth through the area, which I really have always loved since childhood, where I was living at the time, and that I just enjoyed. I just enjoyed being there. So I put myself in this huge panorama. And I thought it's more interesting than a linear map. You know, like all transit agencies with a colored line and a dot and Helvetica lettering. Okay. I also became fascinated with New York in the early 70s, when I made my first adult trip by myself to Manhattan to visit friends. And I became interested in just about everything transit and just basically in New York. My first wife, the late Rebecca Wickman, had a master's degree in fine art, and she gave me a good education in the difference between fine art and commercial art, and how to create a visual and how to make a statement. Her question always to me was, well, what does it say? And I began to understand what was being talked about. And these are 3 images that were from my first solo New York show, and also from my exhibition at the New York Transit Museum, my subway series of 1993. They're all pretty much self-explanatory. The bottom left corner is a little more personal. The title of it is Rebecca's Departure. By the time I painted this, Rebecca suffered from multiple sclerosis and had to be institutionalized and then subsequently perished. The title of this work is Rebecca's Departure. And what I'm saying is how one feels when you have to take somebody to the airport on a Sunday afternoon after having a week with them and they have to leave. Okay. And this is more, of course, from the New York show. I remember showing the work that's in the upper left, Gramercy Pastry Shop, to somebody, and they said, oh, that's another one of your train pictures. And there's no trains in it. I couldn't figure out exactly why they said that. And then I thought, well, maybe it's because of the old neon sign. The painting to the right of it, Hopkins Corner, a corner that's in New York's Manhattan's Chinatown. There was a time when I was laid off from the Milwaukee Road. My brother was the chef at a high-end restaurant in Manhattan, and he wanted to know if I wanted to try being a maitre d' at the restaurant, which didn't work out, ha ha ha. But I was so tired. Rebecca came in from Kenosha, and we walked around one Saturday evening and took pictures in Chinatown. This is the end result. I still feel exhausted when I look at it, but the color there was so lively, and I just wanted to replicate it. The bottom image, Surf Arcade, is at the old BMT Coney Island Stillwell Avenue terminal. And I got such a kick when I first discovered the area, looking from the dark and the shadows out to the light. But it was an old transit facility and it completely fascinated me. Next. Okay. This is, go back one. This is called Downtown Morning. I didn't do an underpainting or anything with this. I just started in one corner and worked all the way down to the bottom right corner with soft pastel on a large sheet of sandpaper. What I was working on at the time was edges and three-dimensionality. And so if you look at the shoe repair sign and the locks and key sign, and then above it, the subway sign, I wanted to give the impression that you could put your hand all the way around the front, around the back. And that's achieved by working on edges. There are old Renaissance techniques for doing edges with halations and dark edges. And then I wanted to really portray bright morning sunlight on a white sign, which is kind of hard to do, but I figured it out by using very light colors, but using the trick of colors against their opposite and warms against cools. It's, unless you really know what to look for, it's almost imperceptible. Also, I like doing the lettering. The one thing I want to say about lettering is it has rhythm. There's a rhythm to it. And I like listening to music when I'm working. I'm also in a community concert band and I'm in the percussion section. So I just like the rhythm. I'm not very good at it, but I'm in it. Next. More from New York. On the left is a station on the Franklin Shuttle, which is a very old line in Brooklyn that had only 4 stations on it. This one is right underneath Eastern Parkway. And at the time I discovered it, the line itself was so run down. This particular station was only illuminated by 3 incandescent bulbs over each staircase on each of 2 platforms. And I wanted to use colors that when you look at the original, you can tell how the place smells. But anyhow, it was so spooky, I had to talk about it. And then on the other painting, Open Sunday Evening. This is the kind of place that's kind of popular, but it isn't major cuisine by any chance. But it's got a wood floor and the menu is done on a chalkboard with all kinds of different colored chalk. Ha ha ha, you can't read it because it's so colorful. And all the waiters are trying to audition. And my parents would come into New York from time to time and we would all go out to a place like this on a Sunday evening, sometimes after it rained all day. And it was such a relief, a moment away from reality. And that's what I was thinking of when I worked on this. Okay. The title of this one is So Late, It's Early. And then the line underneath there, My Country 'Tis of Thee, Sweet Land of Liberty, of Thee I See. When I was 5 and I started grammar school in kindergarten, the first day the teacher came in and she sat down and told us to stand and sing My Country 'Tis of Thee. I had no idea what the words were or anything. Some of the kids did, I didn't. And I thought the words were My Country 'Tis of Thee, Sweet Land of Liberty, of Thee I See. Well, of course it's of Thee I Sing, but you know, you're 5 years old, things sound different. And I thought to myself, geez, they're even singing about the Illinois Central. That's fabulous, must be very important. But this is from a story that an associate of my father told me. He lived with his family in Madison, a suburb south of Chicago by about 30 miles. And at the time, really kind of out in the country. And he would get off at 211th Street, Lincoln Highway. And the first time I saw that particular station, I was fascinated by the stairway arrangement, how the stairs went down from the platform into a little cement tunnel and down a flight of stairs to this canopy waiting area. There was a bus turnaround, a big parking lot, and there was also Connolly's Coffee Shop that had a counter with 14 seats. And at noontime, the wife of the owner went home to bake all the pies for the next day. And I just was fascinated by the scene, but so late, it's early, he talked about how he would work late at night on a commercial art project and take the 3 a.m. Madison local home. And when he got off at 211th Street, the sun was already beginning to pop out of the horizon, he says, and the birds would be singing. He'd be standing there smoking a cigarette, waiting for his wife to pick him up. Next. I'll show you a little bit of my process for a large painting. Once I figure out what I'm going to do, what's going to be seen, I do a pencil layout, and then I do tight pencil sketches. And I can cut out and I do it on tissue paper, tracing paper. I can cut parts out and move things around so the layout really works the way I want it to. And then I trace it down onto the canvas. And the first thing I do is put a thin coat of raw sienna onto the canvas. So I'm not facing a bright white canvas, a big headlight, which makes it very hard to pick out the lightest part of the painting. But I do a tone value, loose painting using thinned Mars Violet and Payne's Gray to get the tone values. And then I can look at it and figure out what I'm looking at. Then the last thing I do, of course, is add color. In the lower left-hand corner of the colored work, you can see my signature. That's a built-up layer of titanium white and dryer. I got that from seeing an original by Norman Rockwell, the painting he did of the Marshall Field clock that at the time was on display at the 7th floor at Fields. And I saw that and I thought, now that's a professional that does that. And I had to do it. I just had to have it. And so that's how I did it. It's a real pain to do, but I do it. Next. The posters for the South Shoreline. The first time after I did Faithful Service, I was asked to do a painting for the Miller Art Project for the community of Miller, which is the eastern side of Gary, for a concert that we were having as a benefit. And I did this painting. This is the Miller Market Park Pavilion at night. And I thought, you know, it's kind of hard to paint a concert, especially since you don't know what the people look like or what the performance is like. So I did this because it really talked about Miller and the pavilion. And we had this event that included bringing people in from Chicago on a chartered South Shore train, which I just happened to catch as the engineer. And I think I'm the only guy that ever ran a South Shoreline train wearing a tuxedo because it was a black tie event. Well, this led to the Just Around the Corner South Shoreline poster project that was used to promote things around the region, sort of similar to what the South Shoreline did in the 20s. The one in the top center for Phil Schmidt's restaurant, I did right the year 2000. We used to eat there all the time when I was a kid. So the left-hand side is my mom and dad and me as a 4-year-old going to Phil Smith's for dinner. Then the Whiting Library. This was the first time I had to really kind of put my foot down with the client, because everybody at the Chamber of Commerce, as well-intentioned as everybody was, they were saying, well, you know, we have this wonderful 4th of July parade. And I said, well, if you do that, it's like rock, paper, scissors. You have the American flag. You're not going to be talking about Whiting. You're going to be talking about patriotism and America. We want to talk about Whiting, and we want to talk about Whiting as an entity. There's the Carnegie Library that's in Whiting, and I said, that's the best thing to show. That's like your highlight. That and a little bit of the neighborhood and the feeling of the clouds coming off the lake, going overhead. And there were people that thought this poster was done in the 20s and nobody had ever seen it before. All right, I'm going to excuse myself for just a brief second. I want to see something because I got a message. Okay, never mind. It was from Matthew. And then Steel for the World. They warned me not to show any stacks with exhaust, with industrial smoke coming out of them. So I made the smokestack go all the way out of the picture. But in the background, you can see allegedly across the lake to the Bethlehem steel plant. Season's Greetings is in Marktown, which was an old Inland Steel Company workers' town with old English-style townhouses. And that's my daughter, Julia, peeking out the door, and the 4 brothers of the sponsor of the poster. And all the lettering on all of these, this is all hand done. And I do that with sign painter's paint because it works out real well. It's enamel and it flows very nicely. Next. This is from when I discovered I could do photorealism. I tell people I'm kind of like a negligent photorealist, and kind of like Hopper, you can tell when I get tired of working on something because it gets real sketchy at the end of the last few passages of the work. But this is from a photo I took of a sign I really liked with the BMT subway, going back to talking about colors and their opposites. Red and green are color opposites, which is why stoplights and traffic lights work out so well. And I like these extruded cast glass letters. I enjoyed portraying that with neon behind it. But this was the first time I really figured out how to get this look. I was influenced by Richard Estes when he became popular. Okay. More realism. Upper left is Pittsburgh. My first trip I made there in 1966. I was 15. This is from a slide I had taken on that trip. I didn't get around to doing the painting, for another 20 years. I mean, I really like to put stuff off. And this is a good example, but I didn't want to do it till I knew what I was doing. But Pittsburgh, downtown Pittsburgh is like that in the afternoon with these wonderful shadows and the way the sunlight comes in. The painting on the right, I was commissioned by the pastor of St. Bride Church on the south side of Chicago to do this as a fundraiser to have the stained glass windows restored. So in the center, replicating a mass from the mid-50s, is Father Bob Roll with the Eucharist. And the 2 altar servers, on the right is my nephew, Tim, and on the left is my son, Matt. And both of them are regular altar servers anyhow, but I enjoyed doing the work on the back of what was a red leather garment that Father Bob wore. And I made the two images in the bottom appear to be stained glass windows. On the left is a Blackhawks poster I did for one of the sponsors of the Chicago Blackhawk. They wouldn't let me take pictures of the players. I had to kind of wing it off of company photographs. And John Taze in the center kept complaining about how he looked. So he looked too young, he looked too old, he looked like this, he looked like that. So finally at the end, what I did, and by this time Matt had grown a couple of inches, we went to the Blackhawks locker room at the United Center. Matt put on Taze's helmet, and I made Matt into John Taze, and he loved it. I never told him how I got it to look like that, but that's how that happened. Next. These three are all opaque watercolor, designer's gouache. To the Chicago and Elgin images, the top and the right are each commissioned works. So I pretty much did what the patron wanted to see as an image. The one on the right is July 3rd, 1957, the last evening that the Royal and Elgin operated passenger service. And so the sun is setting on the Sunset lines, and this is at College Avenue. The one on the lower left shows on the North Shore line, the Cream City Special, which was the only train they ran that carried both an observation car and a diner. And it's one of the few times I did a North Shore train when they had the orange color scheme. Next. The one on the left, electric railway illumination, that's in the collection of the Gorman Museum in Milwaukee. It was originally purchased by Tim Jorgensen, who was one of the last presidents of the South Shore. And it's pastel on electric cut from a slide I had taken at Tremont on a misty autumn evening when the orange cars were still running. And my motivation for this one was showing the difference between the incandescent lighting in the car in the foreground with the fluorescent lighting with the car ahead of it. And just what it's like when you go to pick up somebody in the evening from a commuter train. It's kind of a universal feel. The one on the right, Train of the Stars, I did this as a commission for Tom Hoback, who was the founder and president of the Indiana Railroad, whose father had been a chief dispatcher for the Santa Fe, and Tom was and is basically in his heart a dedicated Santa Fe person. And I just wanted to talk about what it must feel like to be in the middle of the desert near the Santa Fe main line and see the super chief come through in the middle of the night. When I was working on this, I was having trouble getting the color of the red on the head end of the F unit to look like the moon was illuminating it. It kept coming out too warm and too incandescent, and the painting looked like the super chief running through an all-night gas station. So what I did is I have a couple of HO scale Santa Fe F units. It was 3 a.m. on a summer evening on a night when there was a full moon. And I got this bright idea. I'd go outside the house, outside the studio, stand in the middle of the street and hold the F unit up to the moon, the full moon, to get a sense of the color. So I do that. And the next thing you know, on a night patrol comes a local officer. He stops his car and he says to me, you know, I know you like trains and everything, but I didn't think it was a religion for you. But that's how I got that color to really look like it's going through moonlight. Next. I did this as a commission for Bruce Moffat, who's a retired CTA operating official and is one of the renowned historians of the Chicago Rapid Transit and the CTA. And this is a scene that's was right near his old house on the west side of Chicago at St. Louis Avenue, where there was a tower and two sets of crossovers where local trains were passed by express trains. And in this scene, a local elevated train is being passed by a Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin train that used to come in over the Garfield Park line of the Metropolitan L, which became the CTA. This whole area was obliterated when the line was relocated into the middle of the Congress, now the Eisenhower Expressway. But I really enjoyed working on this one, especially doing the destination sign that says Chicago Local and the 425 in gold underneath it. And of course, the motorman kind of looks like me, haha, because he's got a white shirt and tie on and overalls and a jacket. But that's my favorite interpretation of an electric railway man. Next. A lot of people ask who are the people in my paintings and my illustrations. Well, the painting on the right at the top was Breakfast in the Diner with Ms. Minix, which is an illustration that was on the cover of a book on the railroad service from Chicago, from the Midwest to Florida, that was put out by the Pennsylvania Railroad Technical and Historical Society. And I made up the story how this girl was leaving home by herself for the first time and traveling on a Florida train and having breakfast in the diner. And for my model was my then 10-year-old niece, Victoria, who I had seated in our dining room, and she made me make her breakfast and everything. But she's a good subject because she's a good actress and she knows how to get a look on her face. And it really wasn't too much of a problem to age her a little bit, but she kind of come out looking like Jackie Kennedy, but that's all right. And the lower left, this one particular poster has ended up being referred to as Who's the Babe? Well, this is Matthew in the bar of the Electroliner with the daughter of the lady that cuts our hair here in town. Her name is also Tori. She's now a professional dancer. She took dancing in college. And Matt and Tori have been friends since early childhood. And they're both good actors and it worked out, but that's who those people are. Next. We did another one. I wanted to do a painting about having a late night dinner on the Electroliner on the North Shore line. And the title of the painting is Dinner on 809. 809 was the train number of the 8 o'clock Electroliner on the North Shore line from Chicago to Milwaukee. I said that the female got on the train right in the loop and had ordered her dinner. And by the time they got to Wilson, Matt, the male, gets on the train at Wilson Uptown Station and goes right into the lounge car and sits opposite of her. And above is the reference photo. one of my interests, just like with lettering and tickets and everything, was railroad uniforms. And it comes from, first of all, my father having been the best dressed advertising illustrator on North Michigan Avenue in his era. And also my working for Broad Street's Men's Clothing in Chicago in the Palmer House when I was in high school. And I developed some knowledge and appreciation for clothing itself, plus my being fascinated by the variety of caps and cap badges and trim that railroads used on uniforms. One of the things I'm pretty pleased with is I laid out the original specifications for the Metra trainman's uniforms. I wanted to do the illustration on the left. In the old days, promoted men, conductors, station masters, dining car stewards, all had gold badges and trim on their uniforms, and subordinates like a flagman, brakeman, trainman, gateman, all had silver and white trim. And I liked that variety and that contrast. And on the right is a guy in an Illinois Central uniform. And on his left sleeve, 3 stars and 5 bars, indicating he has 45 years of service. And he's got 2 train orders in his upper left pocket, in his breast pocket. And a 4-button coat, which was pretty much standard. Next. One day while surfing on YouTube, I started finding all these videos on Japanese railways. It started with my looking at videos of the Shinkansen, the bullet train. And then I wandered into videos of the Hankyu Railway that operates on 3 lines out of Osaka in the Kansai region of Japan. And I became completely absorbed, because if there's a railway on Earth that operates an exceptionally well-run electric passenger service, it's the Hankyu Railway. And so I just had to do some illustrations of it. I had made some friends on a Facebook group that deals with the Hankyu Railway. And I did the first illustration, the one that's in the center. I had ordered some N-scale Hankyu Railway multiple unit electric cars. And I lined them up out in the backyard on my son's trampoline. I did the reference photo and I made up this visual, and it says, to Osaka in the morning on a Hankyu Railway. And I learned how to write my name in Japanese, or in kanji. In the lower left-hand corner, you can see. The left is a female Hankyu Railway conductor, and on the right, a female Hankyu passenger, but it's the same lady, who is in band with me, by the way, who was part Japanese. And she didn't speak too much. I thought she was like an exchange student and too shy to speak. Turns out she grew up in Oregon, Illinois on a farm. But she was a real good subject as well. Next. Ooh, I got a duplicate. The one on the upper left, you can see this guy kind of speaking sternly to the female on the back platform. The title of this work is, "What do you mean 50 cents extra?" To ride in the parlor car on the North Shore and the South Shore was 50 cents extra. And she never told her husband about the 50 cents, which was a considerable amount back then. And he just found out they're already sitting back there. He's a little upset. But this is from when the color scheme on the North Shore was changing, and it's up on the L. I just find it absolutely fascinating that a train like this operated on the L. And in the lower right is another limited going around the curve near Sheridan. on the north side of Chicago near Wrigley Field. And on the left is a fake poster I did because I like these aerial panoramic shots. And I wanted to do all this hand lettering. This is all lettering that basically was used by the North Shore in timetables. And the colors also come from the 1941 timetable when the electroliners were inaugurated. And this is a view from about Northbrook on the north side, a northern Chicago suburb, looking across the lake towards Milwaukee. I figure that's a pretty unusual view because nobody ever shows the skyline of Milwaukee. So that's why I did that. Next. The upper left is a conductor I knew. His name is Chester Pietrowski. He was a conductor on the South Shore line and he treated me really well. I had like this mishigas when I was in high school. I had to wear a conductor's uniform everywhere. And I was riding on a Saturday from Chicago to Tremont after confirmation class, where my rabbi told me that Jewish boys don't work for railroads. And I asked him, who do you think runs the train in Israel? And he didn't mind that I had a fake uniform on. In fact, he treated me like I was a student trainman. And I'm really pleased to say I remain friends with his son, Ron, and Ron's wife. My meeting them is a whole story in itself, and I'm not going to go into that right now, but Chet really took care of me, and I'll never forget him, and I wanted to portray him. This is from a Middleton photograph, just happened to be photographed and appears in one of Middleton's book on the South Shore. Back then, we had these linen headrest covers that had a silkscreen South Shore insignia on them, and I wanted to portray that as well. The next one, parlor car, that's just a full color interior of a South Shore line Pullman built parlor car before they were rebuilt with different seats. All the colors inside are accurate and authentic. The next painting over on the right, the title is, I think, Two Diners, St. Joe and the Two Diners. St. Joe Valley Limited was the afternoon limited train out of Randolph Street to South Bend. And in the summertime, in the 20s, on Fridays, it carried two diners, a regular South Shoreline diner and a leased, in this particular portrayal, Colorado and Southern dining car. The shops just put MU cables under the floor and they could operate on a regular MU train. But the color contrast is interesting and I wanted to portray it. On the left, in the middle, one of two South Shoreline wood cars that got rebuilt to train with the new steel cars at the time in 1926. So that's the South Shoreline when it was still a very new operation under the Insel management. On the right, on the street running, the midday train that carried a parlor car. When it got to the shops in a few minutes, the two head cars were cut off and the train continued on to South Bend with just the one car and the parlor car. And on the left, the last one is at Klein Avenue before the toll road was built, where the South Shore line passed the Cudahy meatpacking plant and the place that made Ajax cleanser and where they crossed the Calumet River. And also you can see the yellow and black crossing gates, which at one time was a feature of the South Shore before the mandate for red and white gates. And that always fascinated me, and I like to include it. Next. This is fake stuff. This is something else I really like to do. And I like to do it as realistically as possible, because when I post it, it gets people really upset. And it surprises me how upset they can get. There's a story that was told in the quarterly First and Fastest, published by the Shoreline Interurban Historical Society, about when the entrance into Chicago for the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin was threatened. Their attempt at finding alternate routes into the city over regular mainline railroads instead of the CTA were being discussed and planned. So I got it in my head, you know, this is what would happen. They ordered 10 of these units that were like the Rock Island's E6Bs that had the flat cabs, and I made it a double end engine, and it would shuttle between First Avenue, Maywood, and somewhere in Chicago as a diesel, hauling up to 3 electric MU trains to replace the entrance over the Garfield Park L. And I nicknamed them tugs, and I made a whole story about how that operated. I mean, I thought it through, just like I knew a railroad would have thought it through, and figured out all the pitfalls and all the things that had to be taken care of. And on the right, I figured the electric system, the whole multiple unit system, the cars themselves got to such a point of deterioration in the early 70s that they went to the Rock Island and they got themselves maybe 20 or the remaining order of these Pullman built early suburban coaches. They were post-war, they were modern, they had air doors, and I put them with the diesels. And that ended the interurban era on the CA&E, but it's all made up BS. And people challenged me and went all over the place. But I don't care. It's just art. The lower left, one of the last 2 North Shoreline dining cars. I wanted to see what it would look like if after the war, the North Shoreline wanted to retain one for, instead of the one they had, use this as part of the substitute electroliner, and they wanted it modernized. So they sent it over to the South Shoreline in interchange freight, and the South Shore did them a favor. And now this is a fake story I'm telling you. They put in picture windows that were insulated, and they put in sealed windows on the head end with gaskets and rounded corners. And it came back to the North Shoreline, and the North Shore painted it in the silver and crimson scheme. I just wanted to see what it would look like, so I made it. And then on the right, for the longest time, every time I'd see pictures of one of the 3 streamliners that were on the Illinois terminal, somebody always writes, "Oh, isn't it a shame that they didn't get purchased by the South Shoreline?" I thought about that for a long, long time. They wouldn't have worked as is on the South Shore. So I had to come up in my mind how that would have worked in an operating scenario. But before I could even think that through, I wanted to do an airbrushed front end of an IT streamliner had it been purchased by the South Shore, and what the colors would have looked like. And that's what that illustration is. I kind of liked it myself, but It's a long story that includes making everything into mid-train cars, like the observation cars. Next. I got this thing about dining cars because I really like dining cars because I like cooking, I like eating. And I also like, for one thing, the Pullman company. The upper left is inside a Pullman parlor, cafe, restaurant car. The Pullman company referred to their diners of 1932 and afterwards as restaurant cars. They made a whole advertising promotion out of it saying, unlike railroad diners, they were open the entire trip and you could go in as you pleased. And the food was excellent, but it was regular, non-controversial dining. Nothing fancy, but it was just solid, good food. I always wanted to see what the inside of one of those cars would look like. So I, like everything else, I just painted and put myself in there, complete with the famous Indian tree pattern china and their silver. And then I made a little story with this one that the title is Breakfast on the Père Marquette. The guy on the right side at the front, at the table by himself, he's eavesdropping on the couple behind him because they're just mad at each other. And he's also upset because the guy on the other side of the aisle came into the car after him, but he's being served before him. So that's a little bit of the story there. The one in the middle is from a Pennsylvania Railroad publicity photo that has intrigued me my whole life. So I made a painting out of it. And I wanted to show the embroidery that says Broadway Limited on the waiter's jacket. I wanted to do a menu cover too. I just enjoy doing that kind of realism. Underneath it is the interior of a South Shoreline dining car. There were two of them. And I had reference for that green color. And I had seen a real South Shore dining car chair that was in brown leather. And the brown and the green, as a interior decorator, you can tell how that was used to complement each other and to make a contrast and make a colorful interior. The dining car steward has the tuxedo on, but they came off the conductor's list. That's a whole other discussion that we don't have to go into. And then the painting on the right, that's a B&O diner. I did that as a commission. Okay. Outside work that's not railroad, the one on the left, I did for a barber supply guy in South Bend. He was coming out with his own line of barber poles, but he never did it. The one on the right was commissioned by a law firm in Chicago that merged with a law firm in Paris. And they wanted like an old time European beer / wine kind of poster. And this was exhibited in the Louvre, not only for the opening, for their dedication, but for a few days. And I wasn't invited to go. It's the second time that kind of thing happened, but I like the poster. The one in the middle, I did for the guys that made my shirts, Harvey and Hudson, who inherited their business from their fathers, and they're in London in Savile Row. I just wanted to do it. I just wanted to do it. And so this now hangs in London at their shop on Jermyn Street. And below that, one of my hobbies is cake decorating. And I like practicing my lettering on cakes. So that's how that got there. I got pretty good at making roses too. The only problem is I sample my own work. Next. My son, Matthew. I know I talk about him a lot, but he's like a hero in a way because he's deaf, but he handles the disability with great ease and a whole lot of humor. He asked me once how I can stand having to hear all the time without being able to shut that off. He said, "Doesn't that make you nuts?" On the upper left is his first appearance in a painting with Jeff McComas, who had the videos, Toy Trains Are Fun. And I made this afternoon kids playroom that had Lionel trains and projected movies of older trains in the background. And I imagine, if you're from Chicago and you're my age, the theme song from Garfield Goose, an afternoon children's show, when I was painting this. All that lettering is hand done. And I made these three-dimensional looking cartouches at the bottom of the picture with the front of an F unit and the front of a steam locomotive. And then in the middle is close shave for Matt. This is when Matt started to shave for the first time, and I shaved with the straight razor, and he wanted to learn how to shave with the straight razor. And so off he went, and I wanted to document it because he's such a character. He's had to put up with some real discrimination too. You wouldn't believe it. When he applied for college, the excuses two leading colleges gave him for not accepting him. One said, well, they both said this. They didn't want him to have his interpreter for the exam because they were sure the interpreter would be giving him the correct answers. Well, these people are bonded, certified, and licensed. They would risk their job doing something like that. One school said, well, Matt can take the test in Spanish if we would like. I mean, it's just remarkable what we've experienced. On the right, Matt came with me to a trunk show once where I ordered my shirts and I let Matt pick out the fabric. And that shirt he wore in 2013 at the conference was from this trunk show. He picked out a fabric and he became the youngest customer of Harvey and Hudson shirt makers with a custom shirt. And on the left, at the bottom, is Matt as the boy of autumn for an ad for a local tree nursery in our area. And he just is able to do these poses so easily. A Norman Rockwell trick in working with models for paintings, for advertisement, getting somebody who can get their eyebrows to go up really far and open their eyes wide. And that's what I told Matt to do. I was very pleased with the results. And on the right is fairly recent from 2020, Coffee on a Clocker with Mr. Markovitz. Matt, as an adult, having breakfast on a clocker, a hourly train that was operated on the Pennsylvania Railroad between New York and Philadelphia, and parlor passengers would eat in the Pullman operated restaurant cars. And that's what I've got Matt doing in this one. Doing carpeting for Pullman cars is just really a trial. This is the family. Everybody used to say, oh, he wanted to work on the railroad because he just loves trains. Well, yeah, but I liked working past. I wanted to do that because I knew that's where all the girls rode. So I ended up marrying a passenger, the lovely Renee on the left, and me at our wedding. And we have two exceptionally wonderful kids. On the right is my daughter, Julia. She's adopted from Siberia. She graduated from Purdue with a degree in agricultural science. She's now a biologist for the National Wildlife and Game Department. And she works at a fish hatchery in Mishawaka outside of South Bend. And she's just hilarious. She's got one of the best senses of humor. And then in the middle is Matt, the blonde giant who graduated from college 2 years ago with a degree. Remember, all these other colleges said he couldn't be educated, with a degree in culinary arts. And he's with his professor doing this comedy little photo, but you know, he's got this sense of humor. I don't know where it came from, but, and everybody really enjoyed working with him. That he's standing with a platter of sausage, smoked sausage that he had made himself in school. Next. Well, the one on the top, I tell people, I always wanted to be in the Wall Street Journal. And that's kind of a pen and ink pointillism illustration that one guy does in the Wall Street Journal. On the right, that's me in the 70s on the Milwaukee Road when I thought I wanted to work on the Long Island Railroad. So I had a New York fireman's mustache. On the left, another one of my panoramas. And that's me in the studio at the bottom. And there you have it, kids. I hope you liked it. I hope I didn't put you to sleep, but there it is.
Oh, Mitch, that was fantastic. Thank you. And I don't know if you were watching the chat, but the accolades were coming in hot and heavy all the way through. So excellent, excellent work. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Well, we'll really appreciate having you. We do have some questions in the queue. We're going to get to those in just a moment. First, I've got just a couple of announcements as we head into the Q&A section. And I just want to remind everyone that tonight's event has been planned and organized by us, the Center for Railroad Photography and Art. We are a nonprofit, membership-based organization, and it's our mission to preserve and present significant images of railroading, which we achieve through our collections, publications, exhibitions, conferences, and events. We've been doing free online programming like this since April of 2020, and all of our presentations are available for free on our YouTube channel. We have more than 30 of them there at this point. That's youtube.com/railphotoart. Excuse my lettering, it's certainly not up to Markovitz standards, but at least we do something by hand here. And you know, our members, you out there, you make possible everything that we do through your generous support of our work. To the many of you who are already members, thank you. And if you're not a member yet, we would welcome you joining us. Our membership begins at $50 annually. And with that, you receive our quarterly publication, Railroad Heritage, as well as discounted prices on our in-person events, which include our upcoming conference, Conversations 2022, which we will be holding at Lake Forest College in Lake Forest, Illinois on April 8th through the 10th. You can find out more about that and all of our other work and become a member at railphoto-art.org. I know Haley will be dropping links to both of those in the chat. I've got to say something about Haley too. And Mitch, you talking about Matt reminded me of that. If you're wondering why it often takes us a week or more to get our videos posted on YouTube, it's because we add closed captioning to them. And there is a program on YouTube that automatically puts that in, but it takes a lot of manual editing to get it up to something that's close to grammatically accurate. And Haley goes through all of our presentations and does that. And that's something that she took on her own accord, just to try to make our work a little bit more accessible. So that's just something I wanted all of you to know about Haley and some of the great work she does for us behind the scenes. And I think we have, we're going to get back to our programming, and Haley's got just a couple of notes about how this is going to run or how we're going to try to make it work for the Q&A.
You know, I could have
Go ahead.
This in sign language.
Yeah.
But Matt says, because I've got arthritis and my fingers move so slowly, he says I speak with an impediment.
Tough love.
All right, that was.
And then I asked him once, you know, when he was taking driver's ed at the Indiana School for the Deaf, they're a mile away from the Indiana School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I asked him, what do they do for driver's ed at the School for the Blind? He says, well, they take them out in the parking lot and tell them not to hit trees. It's okay, it's okay.
All right, well, let's jump into the Q&A portion of our program. And as a reminder, we're going to do things a little differently than we normally do. We're going to have our audience members ask their questions live. So for those of you who weren't here right at the beginning of the presentation, just as a quick overview again, if you have a question that you would like to say live, or maybe you'd like us to ask, please put that in the Q&A. We will not be looking in the chat for questions specifically for this part of the show. So just type that in. Scott and I will review those. And when we call your name, if your question is submitted, please be ready to ask it live, or your audio will be turned on. So just be ready. Scott, do you want to bring up our first question?
Well, I do have someone queued up, but Haley, I'm not able to turn on their microphones on my end, so
you're right.
I might need you to
You're right. You told me this earlier.
That's okay.
Okay. You should
There
be
we
able
go.
to do that now.
All right, so I'd like to ask Eric Powell on first. Eric, are you there? Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Excellent. All right. Yeah, I just unmuted. So, Mitch, how have you been, my friend? It's been a while.
Good, Eric. How have you been?
Well, I haven't been back to Shapiro's without you. So just know that it's going to have to happen again here soon. It's a deli here in Indianapolis that I think every time Mitch came down when he was working with the Indiana Railroad, guess where he wanted us to go for lunch? And there we were. So,
and every painting I did of the Indiana Railroad, Shapiro's Delicatessen is in there somewhere.
That's true. Well, you should make it a game. You should make it a game for everybody here to challenge them to go and try to find Shapiro's. So,
yeah.
Well, I guess we need to get to questions here. I tell you what, looking at some of your artwork, and I'm very lucky that I've been able to talk to you quite a bit about a lot of these things, but and listen and learn. But you have like the image that's up here right now. You have the clouds. A lot of your paintings have very realistic looking clouds, but a lot of them also, the drawings also have that kind of a cottony effect that I don't know if it's kind of a Leslie Reagan look or however you describe it, but tell me how that inspiration came about and why you chose to use that kind of cloud in the background. I mean, it's beautiful. It's kind of a dreamy look to it, but please take it away and tell me how you came up with that.
Well, part of it, you're right, is the influence of Leslie Reagan, who I think was influenced by Maxfield Parrish. But for me, I like having the clouds because they can be used as an optimistic kind of appearance, or they can be foreboding. But they're always fun to render, and the more I do of them, the better I get at the clouds. I mean, this next one I'm working on, this really has a bunch of clouds, but it adds to the atmosphere. You can feel the air moving around you. And I feel that one of the important aspects of a work is feeling the atmosphere, the atmospheric perspective, not only with colors diminishing and fading as they recede into the distance, but one's feeling of air and temperature around you. You have to, there's a statement that Tom Fogarty, who was the painting instructor for Norman Rockwell, told him. He says, you have to step inside the painting when you work on it. You have to be there. And one of the reasons I like painting and listening to oldies while I'm painting is the feeling of being there. These are my vacations.
Yeah.
Literally is the 72 years worth of vacations, because this is where I go. And it's much better than really going to a tourist trap, believe me.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I appreciate that very much, Mitch. Thank you.
I'm my own gift shop.
Thanks, Eric. Haley,
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks a lot. Haley, do you have someone else up for us now?
Yes, I'd like to call up Clark Auger. Would you like to? Let me see. Hold on. Make sure I can get this. There we go. You should be allowed to unmute now. Clark Auger, if you'd like to ask your question live. Going once, going twice, going three times. All right, well, let's maybe move on to someone else. Maybe we can circle back around. What about Lawrence Pearlman? Would you like to ask your question? Lawrence Pearlman.
Hey, Mitch.
Hey, Lawrence.
Great seeing you. Great program. I've been a fan of yours since I ordered a Wrigley Field by the Elevated Lines poster, and you very graciously signed it for me and just made my day when that arrived. I'm kind of curious. Do you ever wish, based on your work, do you wish you were born earlier to experience kind of firsthand the style that you emulate in some of your paintings and postings? Or, is your mission maybe to recreate the style so another generation could appreciate it? Or is it something completely different that drives your work?
Oh, that's a good question. Knowing what I know of previous eras, I don't know how I would have done, how I would have survived in those times. I think I'm better off where I am now in bringing stuff from those eras to an audience now. I mean, I couldn't do retro stuff back then because that's what was going on back then. But I think I did pretty well exactly where I'm at. When I worked on the railroad, the way I handled being a trainman or being an engineman, I felt like I was in an older era, but it was more enjoyable because it was a contrast of being in a new era, being back in an old era. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like the warm, cool color contrast. You wouldn't know how cool a grape was until you bit into a hot chili pepper at the same time.
Makes a lot of sense, Mitch. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's see, I'm going to call up Kathy Kuby next. Kathy, are you there?
I am.
Hey, Kathy.
Hi, miss you guys.
Likewise.
Mitch,
Hi,
thank
Kathy.
you. Hi, Mitch. I miss you so much.
Yeah, same here. It's good to hear you, see you.
You're going to see more of me. That's all I can say. I need to ask. So I understand when somebody requests a specific work from you, obviously you're working for your employer at that moment. But where do you find the most personal inspiration? And I have to say, honestly, your referencing of rhythm with the typeface,
With lettering, yeah.
it brought me to tears. It really, really did, because my wonderful husband and I used to talk at length about his voice as a drummer and my voice as a writer, and to hear you speak of the transferability of the same concept from one art form to another kind of broke my heart in a good way.
Yeah.
And I love you for that. But so where do you find personal inspiration outside of contract work?
In terms of doing a personal painting or putting myself into a contract painting?
Yeah. Your personal work, something that just inspires you personally.
Well, you never know when it's going to get you.
It bites you in the butt.
Bites you in the, yeah, the butt, yes. It comes right up out of nowhere. And I never know when it's going to strike me. I can be looking at a book. I can be listening to older music. I have this thing, it's called synesthesia. When you hear certain notes or music, yeah, you see color and shapes.
I've heard of that.
Director about it. Yeah. The way I could read music in a concert was by seeing like these bright blue little explosions for the cymbal parts,
Oh,
the
how
crash cymbal.
beautiful.
And I talked with your husband. I've talked to Jim about that years ago.
Yeah.
And so anything like in music could set it off, because in listening to older music, in terms of doing paintings, certain notes create certain color schemes.
Yes.
I have eras in my life, like the 4 years of high school, that my mind arranges into color schemes. And I try not to have it too artificially influenced by like Paisley prints and Nehru shirts from the 67 and 68, but just in general, color schemes appear in the way my mind works. And from the color schemes comes the paintings.
That is so beautiful. Thank you, Mitch.
Oh, you're welcome. So drag Kevin and come on back down here for lunch.
Okie dokie. Miss you.
Miss you too, Kathy. I was hoping Matt would stop by real briefly, but he's, you know, he's involved. He's got a wonderful girlfriend.
Yeah.
He's up from Florida, and they're just so happy together. I didn't want to say, you know, you got to come out here and say hello to everybody. You know, I don't want to be like my parents were. If he wants to come in, okay. If he doesn't, believe me, I understand.
All right, moving on. George Lapierre, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, Mitch, I really love the mixture of like really practical advice that you have and aesthetic things that you've been doing. I was wondering at an early time when you were working on the railroad and working on illustration, did your coworkers give you a hard time at all, or did they support it, or did they know what you were doing, or how did that all fit together?
They didn't know nothing. They never said anything about it. We interacted as trainmen and enginemen interacted, worked together. Everybody on the South Shoreline had a great sense of humor. I enjoyed working there with everybody, and the same with the Milwaukee Road, which was quite a friendly place to work. Nobody really said anything about it. On layovers, I used to go to my father's studio, unless it was really hot out, and I'd work at my father's studio. Sometimes some coworkers went with me. That reminds me, years ago when my father had workshops at the studio, when we had a small art school, one of the cafe attendants from Amtrak was also a student. And one night at one of the workshops, she was at the workshop, I was at the workshop, and we were both working number 9 together. It was just like old time when I was a kid, and my father would give us all rides home from Boy Scouts. He took me and the cafe attendant and a few other people back to Union Station.
So you can imagine it as a time that commercial art and art was like a trade. It was not something that was too far away from working another job, right?
Well, yeah, commercial art I wasn't good at the time I was on the railroad until I was on the South Shore. I had to do it more and more. Commercial work for a client, a real client, is difficult a lot of times because you don't have any real leeway at all. And I was able to get by with it. But on the railroad, you were talking about my coworkers and how they treated it. It didn't matter really to them.
That's great. That's really great. Thank you.
The only time it really came up is I designed a tattoo design for a fellow engineman.
Really nice.
But that was it. And they never said anything about, like, on the South Shore when I did timetable covers. And on a couple of them, I put some of the people I work with on the timetable cover.
Thanks, George. Mike Mateka, let's see, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Mike.
Hey there, Scott. Mitch, this has just been absolutely delightful. Your imagination, your spirit, and as someone who hits drums on occasion, I love the connection.
Thanks, Mike.
What fascinates me is some people get really stuck in a certain medium or certain use, and you use so many different mediums. You're so meticulous with your paper. How does the subject matter kind of frame your choice of your your paints and your paper and how you're going to approach it? Because you are all over the map in so many wonderful ways.
That's a good question. In the beginning, when I was doing color work, I favored pastels because they were dry and I didn't have to mix them and I didn't have to worry about medium. I could work with soft, medium, and hard pastel and pastel pencils. The best substrate for using pastels, which really took the pigment well, was the sandpaper or the 3M Electrocut. So when I started working big and I started working with color, I favored the pastels because I could even do lettering with it. The only problem I ever had with pastels, and I probably should have continued, was that I never wore a mask and I started to get ill from it. And I remember coughing up phlegm once, and I said to people, if I ever get sick and they operate on me and open up my lungs, they're going to see the NBC peacock because I had so much dust in me. So I also felt that I wanted to be a classic painter like Rockwell, and I wanted to use oils because I found it fascinating that within 21 tubes of different color, if you squeezed out the right amount and put it on the brush and put it on the right spot on a canvas, you get a painting. When I developed more into using oil and the possibilities is when I liked working with oil and other aqueous mediums like opaque watercolor. If I want to do a quick work and I do it small, and I'm going to use an airbrush in certain passages, I like to use opaque watercolor. I like using airbrushes. I like using older Pache airbrushes like the Pache AB. It's such a classical commercial art tool. And I remember some of the people that worked with my father using them and seeing them on sale at the art supply store that was by my father's studio.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Great question. And Mitch, I don't know if Maddie has any questions, but she just wanted to come up and say hi. So this is Maddie.
Oops. You know, we got 4 dogs in the house.
Oh, fantastic. This is the only one we have. We've had a couple of people write in questions about the Westinghouse painting in Pittsburgh of the Westinghouse Bridge. Just curious to hear a little bit more of your discussion, inspiration, how you studied it, how you got the lighting right, all of that.
Well, getting the lighting right, you know, I had to make that up in my mind. I had to just kind of figure that out because the reference photograph I worked from was a daytime photo. But it was for one of Mike Schaefer's wonderful books. And I wanted to have that robust, thumping, vibrating industrial sky where I grew up on the south side of Chicago in the summer or when it was humid and cloudy out, when the steel mills, when the blast furnace would go off and they'd open the furnaces up, the sky went completely orange. And everybody, you know, we'd all be sitting out on porches, visiting in the neighborhood. It would be like a 4th of July fireworks display. Everybody'd go, oh, because it was so dramatic. It just came out of me. There's no defining what that was, except I'm such a fan of Pittsburgh. And to me, and the east side of Pittsburgh. And the Westinghouse Bridge is such an emblem of the east side. I couldn't resist. Because in that one little nook with Turtle Creek and Westinghouse, and where the East End car lines went through, and where the one line, the Ardmore line, went over towards Wilmerding, it just completely absorbed me. There was no escaping it, and that's what came out of me.
Kevin Key, for you here.
Yeah, I'm here, Scott. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Oh, great, great. Yeah, it's not a question so much as just a request for Mitch. And Mitch, you know what a huge fan of yours that I am. Maybe
Yes.
talk a little bit about the influence of those Insel artists from the 20s and 30s. I know that their work was an influence, and I also know you're a bit of a student of all those guys, and I just wondered if you'd like to maybe comment on that a little bit more.
Well, that's a good question. My main influence was Leslie Reagan. But collectively, their ability to lay out a very concise vertical image and make it timeless and make it speak in the specific of the locale they're talking about always fascinated me. And I like copying the lettering style of Oscar Rabe Hansen, who was shot to death in the Skokie Marsh by a jealous girlfriend, but we won't go into that.
My goodness, I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah, because he was awarded that posthumous award from the New York Advertisers Society for the poster Homeward Bound. And everybody said, well, he died young. What happened? When the poster series started, the new poster series with the Forum in Indiana, J.J. Saddlemeyer gave me the phone number of the last living Insel era artist, Walter Graham.
Yeah.
And I called Walter up. He told me all kinds of stories. It was like railroad stories, only it was for commercial art. And that included what happened with Oscar Rabe Hansen.
Great stories. Thanks, Mitch.
You're welcome.
Mitch, we have a question from, it looks like a younger listener, someone who was raised in the digital age. And he's curious about the process for reproducing your drawn images on brochures and posters. How did you do those, like particularly the images, and what your process is?
Well, now with the watercolor works I do them the size that fit on my scanner. And I'm careful about scanning, but that's just so I can put them on Facebook and tell everybody what a genius I am. So that's out of vanity. But in terms of the posters, taking a large 28 by 42 painting and making a reproduction print work out of that, they have to go to a professional photographer that specializes in print photography. And the camera has to focus right dead center of the work. You can't take a picture of the work like from an angle. Like if you asked your aunt to take a picture of the painting she's got and it's like off to one side. No. It's got to be dead on. And the color has to be adjusted when the photograph is taken, like with one of those color matching charts that the photographer puts next to it with the different colors. So you can have a gauge of what the colors really are. And then even when they're printed, sometimes the printer will borrow the original work itself. So they've got something to match everything up with.
Scott, do you have any other questions you want to bring up?
Yes, I don't know that I haven't had anyone say they can go live, but Mark Jones had a, oh, you did? Okay.
Jan, would you like to ask your question live?
Oh, sure. This is Jan Swerts,
Oh,
currently
Jan.
in Portland, Oregon, but I used to live in Chicago, and my father taught at the Art Institute of Chicago as one of the instructors. And one of his models lived in Dyer, Indiana, so every Thanksgiving we rode the South Shore line. So who knows, I may have crossed paths with you en route somewhere along those ways. This is back in the 60s and early 70s.
Do you remember who the model was? Because all the schools kind of shared the models around the circuit.
She had red hair, and I can't remember her name. I was probably about 8 or 9 years old.
It wasn't Squeaky, was it? She was like a short lady that was
short, red hair.
Yeah, that's Squeaky.
It could be. I could be. I didn't know her nickname, but it's her husband ran a machine shop in Dyer, Indiana. So, and he invented pizza machines and stuff like that. It was an amazing family. But I worked with a guy by the name of Rich Taylor, or also known as Ralston Taylor, who had worked on
the North Shore.
On the North Shore, yeah. And he told me about putting up wire doing 60 miles an hour and putting going off from third rail onto the overhead wire and some of the other tales he had here. My parents are both artists, and I'm just amazed at the range of your techniques and stuff like that. My mother's side has like 4 generations of commercial artists, so it's a very hard, demanding job because you're literally painting to make your food.
Yes, yes.
That did you ever talk or meet with any Norfolk or not North Shore employees?
When I was on the Chicago and Northwestern and the Milwaukee Road, I worked with North Shoreline men. And Vicky, the last surviving female North Shoreline train woman, worked at a luggage store in the Loop near All Nation Hobby Shop, and she sold me a grip once.
Oh, cool, cool. I'll tell you this little quick tale here about, the North Shore routinely did 80, 90 miles an hour out there.
Yes.
And one guy was in the habit, everybody has their tricks of getting over the road. I'm a retired locomotive engineer, by the way. So they would use a mark to when they would start their station stop. So you'd have to set the brakes and you come roaring in there at 80 miles an hour and you want to hit that platform within about 3 or 4 feet spot. And this particular guy used pop bottles. He'd set them up out where you could see them, and then he would see the pop bottles and he'd set the brakes, come in there and stop right where he's supposed to. And some of the other workers figured what he was doing and they started moving around, and he'd end up either stopping short or overshooting the station stop. And he had a stutter when he was excited. So I will paraphrase this for a general audience. You're messing with me. That was one tale he told, and just it sounded like a really neat era, which other than riding on the South Shore line, I missed that all. I didn't start railroading till 1978 and maintenance away on the Burlington Northern.
Well, we all had spots. We figured out our spots, and you kind of learned it when you're breaking in, where your spots are. I would never use anything transient like a pop bottle. That's kind of suicidal.
Well, they were worth 2 cents. You'd be picked up by the first person coming along.
Yeah, well, and if it was dark out or storming out or there was snow, you were empty. So you had to have a substantial spot. And I knew if I hit the platform at just about 40 miles an hour, you could get 8 cars all the way down to the other end and get stopped and still make a graduated release and not give anybody whiplash.
Yeah, you didn't want to launch them.
I used to tell people I had handcrafted stops. That was my little marketing thing. It even made me sick to say it, but I would say that. We had an engineman that did what he referred to as precision dumping. Yeah, you know what I mean. He would be going along and he knew right where to put the train in emergency and it come right to a stop where he wanted to. It's really scrappy. And then of course he'd leave the station.
Yeah, flat spots galore. Oh boy. No, I just love the look of everything, you know, and of course, I remember all the old Insol advertisements and stuff like that, and I have an original Illinois Central poster of one of the bathing beauties from the dunes out there in
Yes.
Indiana. Always beautiful, beautiful work. The lithography is incredible.
Well,
Jan, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate the question. And Mitch, we've got another one came in from Mark Jones, who asks that specifically as both an artist and a railroader, especially during the 70s and 80s, from that perspective, what do you think the future of railroad art is? And he's curious about whether you've taught art lessons or basically just what you think of the legacy of railroad art is going forward.
well, categorizing something as railroad art, that's kind of a broad subject. If you're talking about representational art, realism, old time commercial art, I guess we could kind of explore every one of those facets. In terms of what's the future, you have to look at the industry itself and the people that are in charge of the industry itself. Now, there's some railroads that appreciate art and appreciate aesthetics and strive for a specific look. And I always tell people I don't like to use isms. I don't like to use anything that looks like it came out of a depot that became a lousy spaghetti restaurant. You know, I've got certain rules for making the authentic railroad look. A lot of it has to do with type selection and lettering, besides illustration. But the future, it just really depends on the future of the industry and who you want to speak to and what you want to tell them. Because it's not a picture of and it's not a decoration. And you always have some fool that says, why are we involved with, and this is a term I absolutely hate, something artsy fartsy. What a terrible thing to say. That's like a racist kind of comment. Not to get into anything like that, but that's an industrialist kind of horrible thing to say. Artsy, that's a diminishment.
No, it's never a term I've much appreciated. I think it diminishes all of our work, including the creator. I mean, everything we do is creative and artistic. So why would you say something that would diminish it?
Well, people are being smart guys. I tell them, what would you think if stock certificates and currency were nothing but typewritten little pieces of paper?
Yeah.
What would be the fun of being a cash out or something? But you have these people that are detractors that work against you, and that's the dangerous thing. It kind of comes out of a jealousy, I think, sometimes, or their inability to understand what it is exactly you're doing, because they only see artwork as a picture of a. And when you do a picture of a, it's got to be like a photograph. And if you're going to do a picture of a that's like a photograph, why don't you just take a photograph? But you have to tell them, well, it's great to be a photographer and to do quality photography, which I, of course, appreciate because I use it as reference. But with photography, you record the instance, and with a painting, you record the essence. And Edward Hopper used to carry around in his wallet a quote that basically said, "The world outside of me through the world inside of me."
Say that again.
The world outside of me through the world inside of me.
No, that's great. That's really good.
yeah, that's pretty accurate because it's like people asking me where my influence comes from or how do I do a painting. Well, something's been floating around inside of me for decades sometimes, like that one Pittsburgh painting. And it finally comes out because enough has gone into me that now it can come out of me. Now I can talk about it.
Haley, do we have time for one or two more?
Yeah, we can, maybe we'll end on this last one. Dave Soms, would you like to ask the question, the last question? Dave,
Dave, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Okay, done. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Great. Mitch, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed your presentation tonight, and I'm really thankful that we have artworks like this included in the CRPA events, because it isn't just about photography. There is much more involved. I've always been fascinated by graphics. I've got a very simple question, it goes back to your beginning of your presentation about the development of the timetables you were working on. You said you did a very painstaking cut and paste effort with individual letters and numbers. I've got half a ton of 1870s letterpress in my studio. It's a wonderful old printing press that is now a joy to work with. And it made me think, well, why didn't you go to a letterpress studio or a letterpress shop at the time and have them do the tedious work of laying out the timetable itself rather than doing the cut and paste that you described?
Well, in 1984, the type world was changing from hot type to cold type, computer and photographic type. All of the type in the timetable was hot type, where it would come off a linotype or handset monotype, and the typesetter would make a proof etch for you. He'd make 3 of them. Take clay-coated paper, ink up the type that he set for you, and he'd print on this clay-coated paper. And you take that, cut it out, and do a key line and paste up. But with the typeface for the numerals used for the time columns, I was such a stickler back then. I wanted it to really look like a South Shoreline timetable. Nobody had that font for those numerals because that font is only numerals. And unless you had a linotype and you were a timetable printer like Poole Brothers or Rand McNally or Stromberg Allen, you didn't have those numerals. I've got a Monson type book from 1939 that has just about every typeface there ever was in use back then, and those numerals aren't in there. So it was just easier. You know, I found some trains where most of the times matched up. I had some trains where I had to use 4 individual numerals pasted up. It was a real exercise in discipline, but that was the only way I could get that look. And I felt that if we were going to make a South Shoreline look for the Venango people taking over the railroad, it was important to really have a Venango, a South Shoreline look. You couldn't just say, oh, we did an old time, it was the South Shoreline look, ha, 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 ha. And you made it look like the Chamber of Commerce went to some guy who said, oh yeah, I've got old type, yeah, but it's on a computer. It wouldn't have, as Judge Judy would say, it wouldn't have had the ring of truth. It would have looked fake. I didn't want to do fake. I wanted to do real. I referred to it as restorative graphics. I mean, that sounds heady and it's a whole lot of BS, but it worked out for me.
Oh, I understand all that. Mitch, fully understand all that. I've got a number of posters, including Boston Maine Snow Train poster from the early 1930s. I fully understand what you're saying. And I've been searching for a particular typeface, a font myself to use on my own press that I've never been able to find from a company named, well, that's a long time ago, but I understand what you're saying. To me, the wonderful nature of all the graphics of what you're doing is the combination of the typefaces used for the era in combination with your artwork. And that's why I asked the question. I fully understand what you're saying. Thank
I
you.
want to say one more thing about type. Typefaces have a voice, like an announcer. Typefaces have a gender. Typefaces have a volume. You know, like when people complain, well, you used all caps when you answered me on that. You no need to shout. That's a perfect example of how a typeface has a voice. And so if you lettered out the phrase United States Marines and you used a lettering style that looked like busted up boards with nails, like some kind of country and western joke, people get upset with you. That's how important type is. And it's a much ignored phenomenon.
Fully understand. Thank you very much for the presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Great point. Thanks, Dave, for the good question. Thanks for everyone for sending your questions in. We had a bunch. We've got through a lot of them. Mitch, any closing words as we wrap up this evening?
Well, the only thing I can say is, you know, this is a real tough kind of business because everybody's waiting for you to die. And I learned this early on when I used to sell my posters at a booth at Pierogi Fest in Whiting. The best example is this couple came up to me and looked at the posters and looked at my name, and they looked at me and they said, you know, we've never heard of you before. And I said, well, that's okay. I've never heard of you either. Then they start going through my posters like they're cleaning up their kid's bedroom. And they said, have you done this all your life? I said, I don't know yet. And then they came back with me. Will these be worth anything once you're dead? I said, I thought they were worth something now. That's about all I can say about it.
Oh.
It's like we used to say on the railroad, you have to learn to thrive on rejection.
Well, thank goodness you love doing it. Our community's certainly better for having your work in it, and we're so grateful for you to share it tonight with us. Thank you, Mitch.
That's very kind of you, Scott. Thank you.
Mean it sincerely. Thank you very much. And Haley, we'll probably have this up on YouTube next week sometime, you think, for anyone who wants to come back and give it another view and send it out to the world?
Definitely look for this on our YouTube page. I'm going to drop that link in the chat right now. It's youtube.com/railphotoart. You can see that as well as all of our past online programming. You said we had nearly 30 now, Scott?
I believe I think even, I haven't counted for a little while, but there's quite a few, especially with all of the ones from the two full-day conferences we've had there.
You want one more railroad story?
Why not?
One job I used to have on the Milwaukee Road, return was on Suburban, going back to Fox Lake at 2:10 in the afternoon. It was a 2-car train, easy to work. And we would always stand outside in the concourse loading passengers for the trip home. Well, there used to be a train to Elgin that left Union Station at 2 p.m. We left at 2:10, that train left at 2. When the RTA took over, they decided they had to do something to prove they could do something. So they took the 2 o'clock train on the DNI to Elgin and made it leave at 1:50. Well, I was loading the 210 the day after this happened, and I see this lady come charging into the concourse with 2 shopping bags. And she's looking at all the gates. And it was like on a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Up and down, up and down. And it comes up to me and she says, And if you work with the public, if somebody starts off by saying, "Ah, yes," you know you're going to get it. Well, she says, "Ah, yes. Where's the 2 o'clock train to Elgin?" I said, "Well, I'm sorry, but yesterday they changed the timetable. Instead of leaving at 2 o'clock, it now leaves at 1:50. You missed it by 5 minutes." And she says, "Oh, well, nobody told me anything about that." I said, "Look, we tried calling your house all last night, but your line was busy." And she said, "Yes, I was speaking with my sister." And, you know, it was like on Bozo Circus when the stagehands start laughing at the joke. You know, it's a dirty joke. The carman, everybody was laughing. That's one of my favorite stories, but I had to tell it. It's real railroading too, by the way.
No, well, you got to do it.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Mitch. Thank you for, sharing so many of your fantastic stories. What a life and career you've had, and the work you've done obviously speaks for itself. And you can see that from the amazing chat that we've had going and the great questions we've had from our participants. Thank you for everyone who asked a question. Yeah.
Well, are we all going out for pizza now? What's good?
Right? Well, definitely time to raise a glass, I think.
Now, you better go to the Mustard Museum.
Yeah, that's right. It's just up the street in Middleton.
Yeah.
They might be closed at this hour, but catch them tomorrow.
All right, kids, I'm going to go.
Good night, Mitch. Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone for tuning in. And we'll be back, I think, March 1st with our next presentation, Haley.
Our next presentation will be on Tuesday, March 1st, The Art of Railroading from the Groman Museum's collection, the Groman Museum from the Milwaukee School of Engineering. We will have a presentation from James Keislerberg, their director on all of the railroad images, prints, photographs, paintings, sculpture.
They got one of mine.
Their excellent museum holds. So look forward to that. We'll get registrations out by the end of the week.
Excellent. We'll see you there.
All right,
thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.